everybody. Good to see all of you, and we're so glad that you are with us watching online. And as we say around here, it's no mistake that anybody's here, that God's going to use this time to change our lives, both individually and together. And by the way, we had a little talk here. I don't know if you folks out online heard this, but I have terrible microphone technique, right? And so Bernie's supposed to go like this, but if she forgets to do it and I see you over here going like this, then I know that I'm supposed to get it up close and really talk, okay? So if you can't hear me, let me know, all right? That way we can all work together. So I have to tell you, this last week, after the last couple of sermons, I have this friend of mine. She lives in Fort Dodge. Her name is Susan. And Susan listens to the YouTube videos because she likes just the sermon. I don't know if she's in the car or whatnot. And so she texted me. I think it had to have been Tuesday afternoon because I mentioned this at Majesty, our prayer vigil on Tuesday night. And she said, could you please preach at least one sermon that doesn't make me cry at the end of the sermon? And so, Susan, this one's for you, okay? I want to tell you a story that I told on Friday at Michael's funeral. And as some of you were here, I know, and those of you who weren't, if you were here, you'll bear with me because I think it also applies here. It was summertime. It was a summer evening. It was about this time of the year, maybe just a tad later in the season. I don't remember for sure. And it was a Saturday. I remember that because my sermon wasn't done. And I knew Sunday was coming very quickly. I was a pastor in Lake Preston, South Dakota, this tiny little city of 800 in just 35 or so miles west of Brookings, and I was pastor of two country churches. They were literally out in the country. One was 8 miles to the northeast, the other was 8 miles south and a little east of there, and the last stretch home was about 8 miles back west. And I would make this round robin every Sunday. And it was a lovely place to do ministry because I also got to do the work of the people. And in fact, that's what happened that particular evening. I got a phone call from John Nelson. John, I hope you're listening. I'll let you know that I talked about you, and then you can catch it if not. I got a call from John Nelson. He was one of my farmers to the north, and he wanted to tell me that they were going to put up hay tonight, and they could use an extra hand. Well, send me in, Coach. The sermon can wait for later. And so, I got out there, and it was just it hadn't quite turned dusk yet. And then when dusk turned to darkness, it was one of those really perfect nights. The sky was completely clear. The stars were shining bright. And then off to the west, on the far western horizon, you could see these tiny flashes of light. And so we did our work. The bales kept coming off the conveyor, and we would stack them neatly on the back of the wagon. And then we would have this quiet conversation amongst the two of us. There was one on the tractor. There were two of us stacking bales. And we'd have this quiet conversation. Then every so often, we would glance up and watch as the flashes inched closer to us. And as they drew near, with each flash, you got a glimpse of that which contained the flash. Large, billowing, black and white clouds that started rising high above us. And it was so cool to see. I mean, there you were, working beneath this thing. And as you watched it, imagine this. As you watched it, you were at the same time a giant in the earth and a tiny speck beneath a 50,000-foot mountain of majesty and light. And so the tractor kept humming back and forth, up and down the field, and it kept eating up those windrows of hay, and the bales kept coming off the conveyor. That was our purpose. That's why we were out there. But every so often, we would glance up and look at the sky, and we knew that we were in the presence of something larger than us, something more consequential than the bales of hay that were neatly stacked on the back of our wagon. Okay, let's stop for a minute and sing.
Faith of our fathers living still, in spite of dungeon, fire, and sword. Oh, how our hearts beat high with joy whene'er we hear that glorious word. Faith of our fathers, holy faith, we will be true to thee till death.
Thanks, Adam. Let's show appreciation. Good old-time music. Thank you so much. That's so much fun. And fills so many of our spirits, doesn't it? So I haven't seen any hands yet going like this, so I must be okay. Okay, good. Well, I like that. So we are in the middle of, or not in the middle. We are getting really towards the end of this summer-long sermon series on the book of Acts and how God has created this Spirit-led church, this church on the move. And I had Shelley read a story today that's really just a small piece of something much larger. I didn't want her to go into the whole thing because I'm going to tell you the rest of the story here in just a minute. But when you get home today, or when you get done with worship online, I'd like you to go home and I'd like you to look at your Bibles. This is in Acts chapter 16. And I'd like you to start at verse 11 and read all the way to the end of the chapter. Because this is Paul and Silas's time that they spend. It's their second missionary journey. And this is the time that they spend on that second missionary journey in a city called Philippi. Right? And as you read all these stories, you will probably be like me. I mean, I read the stories several times before I saw something else. And I just saw them as a set of stories, one after the next, and they were all just sort of self-contained stories. That's all they were. They were just one story after the next, and one didn't really have much to do with the other, except that it was a lead into the next. That's all it was. And so it starts in about verse 11 with a woman by the name of Lydia, who goes to a prayer gathering and has a chance meeting with Paul and Silas. And now Lydia is a wealthy woman. She's a person of means, she's a businesswoman, and she's very successful at what she does. We know this because she's dealing in fine purple cloth. Purple was the color of royalty because to create purple cloth was an expensive process. And so she would be like the $1 million real estate agents that you see on TV that are working in New York and LA. That's the kind of bucks she was probably making because she was dealing with high-end clients. So she's a person of wealth and she's a person of means, and she has this chance meeting at a prayer gathering. And by the way, she's not Jewish, but she has interest in God. She has this chance meeting at this prayer gathering with Silas and Paul. And in the course of that meeting, Jesus opened her heart to larger things. And then she opened her house. She became baptized. And then she opened her house to Paul and Silas so that they could stay in Philippi a bit longer. Next is a slave girl who Paul and Silas meet. And she has this dark thing that's in her life. The book of Acts calls it a spirit. And this dark thing will not leave her alone. It quite literally torments her. But it gets even worse than that because she's a slave and her owners have seen a business opportunity in her troubles. And so they take her darkness and this girl and they turn her into a circus sideshow so that they can line their pockets with money. And every day when Paul and Silas pass her by, she starts following them and starts shouting out, "These are the people who will tell you about salvation." She just follows them. Somehow she knows this. It's part of that dark spirit. Until finally, Paul gets tired of her following and turns to her and says, "I want this thing to go away from you." And she is freed. Well, now that leads us to the owners of the slave girl, who have just lost their cash cow because now the circus sideshow is over. She doesn't have this thing anymore, and nobody was going to pay money to see this, a normal person who has been healed. And they are so angry with Paul and Silas that they have them drugged to the center of the city, and they have them beaten with rods until they are bruised and bloodied, and then they drag them to the jail and tell the jailer, "Do not let these people go." And the jailer takes them into the deepest cell in the middle of the dungeon and shackles them and shuts the door tight. And then there's the jailer, who, in the dark of that night, this is the story that Shelley just read, when the ground beneath his feet starts to shake, and the chains of all the prisoners come unloosed, and every cell door in the prison swings itself open, he has decided that his life is over, that he has failed, and that if he doesn't kill himself, the owners of the jail will do it in the morning. So he takes out a sword, and he's about to take that which God gave him, his life. And Paul and Silas shout out, "Stop, we are all here." And he is baptized. And he is moved by the love of Jesus. So much so that this man takes these two people, Paul and Silas, whom he formerly held captive, and now takes them to his home, where he tends to the wounds that they received at the center of the city. Got all that? There's more to chapter 11. I just want to stop there. This is enough. Okay? Read the rest of it, though, because the ending's cool, too. So when you look at these stories, it looks like they're just all self-contained stories, right? Kind of. They're just held together with a little rhetorical glue. And if you think that, think again. Because something unseen is happening. Above Paul and Silas is a 50,000-foot mountain of majesty and light. And he is guiding and directing everything. Let's review it, okay? First, there's Lydia. Then there's the slave girl. Then there are the owners of the slave, and the prison, and the guard, and the healing. They all look like they're independent stories. But then if you glance up, you see that they're not. Because without that chance meeting at the prayer gathering, there is no Lydia. And without Lydia's hospitality, so that Paul and Silas can continue to stay in Philippi, there is no slave girl. And without the freedom of the slave girl, there is no angry owners who have him beaten and put into prison. And without the prison, there is no jailer. And without the jailer, there is no tending to their wounds. See what I mean? God is active and alive in everything that happens. Now, I'm going to stop here because I want us all to be careful. This is important. Listen carefully. This is like a quilt. Individual patches. And God doesn't create the patches. He doesn't put darkness on a slave girl. He does not have his servants beaten to a pulp and put in prison. And he doesn't have a guard who lives with failure. Those are the patches. God doesn't create that. He just sews the patches together. And as he does, he creates this masterpiece out of our brokenness, out of those troubles, out of everything that is wrong with life. He creates and stitches together this masterpiece of hope and promise and life. How are we doing, Susan? You crying yet? Let's sing.
Excuse me. Our fathers chained in prison dark were still in heart and conscience free. Oh, sweet would be their children's fate if they like them could die for thee. Faith of our fathers, holy faith, we will be true to thee till death.
Okay, let's go back to Lake Preston for a minute. Because it occurs to me that so often we get so focused on the next bale that's coming off the conveyor that we forget to glance up and see what's really happening. I think that happens all too often in our lives. Just these series of unconnected events that appear to be random or appear to make it seem like you're all by yourself and maybe you're in control and maybe you're not. And if that's the case, I guess I'd like you to consider the possibility. Oh, here we go. If that's the case, then I'd like you to consider this possibility. that if that's the way you see life, you're only fooling yourself. You're only fooling yourself into believing that you are a giant in the earth, but that you are not tiny specks beneath that mountain of majesty and light. And we need both. We really do. You see, without that, it's just a series of unconnected events. But that's not what's happening. Because God uses everything in your life. The patches are sewn together to create a meaning and purpose that is real and true and bigger and more important than anything your single patch could possibly represent. Okay, folks? Got that? So, if you are a Lydia, someone who is well-to-do and been given financial means, glance up, because your possessions are not your own. As Jesus says, to whom much has been given, much is expected. And if you are enslaved by a darkness, or if you are used by a system that seeks only to gain off of your life, glance up. Look to the sky, because your freedom is at hand, and that freedom will change you, and it will change the lives of those around you. And if you are so possessed with the advancements in this world, so much so that you do it at the expense of others, then glance up and see the mountain of light and be humbled and know that these are small things compared to what God would have you be. And if you are racked with failure, like a jailer in the night, know this, that God may put someone in your life who will help you see redemption. And as that happens, you will turn and heal the wounds of the one who God has used to set you free. And for that we give God thanks and praise. Amen.